If you earned overtime last year, the good news is there's a new deduction, so you can not have to pay taxes on it. The bad news is the deduction is not automatic. You've got to do something, and it has some unique rules. I'm answering the most frequently asked questions from you. That more coming up. Last week I shared a video about the surprising rules that are required in order to take advantage of the new no tax on overtime part of the OBBBA rules that take effect in 2025 and are around for tax year 2026, 27, and 28. The good news is if you worked overtime in 2025, you want to make sure that you get this deduction. The bad news is it's not automatic. And there's actually some things that you need to do in order to ensure that you get the deduction, but it also is just very complicated. There are a lot of rules and issues, and therefore it got a lot of fantastic questions from you, fans of the show and the program. And I wanted to do a follow-up video to answer the most common questions that we got. First, just the high-level details. The deduction, this is, no tax on overtime. That's not what it is. It's a deduction on eligible or qualifying overtime up to $12,500 for single filers or $25,000 for joint filers, and it's just on the overtime premium. Okay, and sadly, it's if you're working overtime and you're getting paid time and a half, it's not the full time and a half. Okay, it's just the half, unfortunately, and it's a federal deduction, not a state deduction, and it's not deductible from FICA taxes. You get that deduction on your eligible overtime premium if your income is below certain thresholds. For single filers, your income, modified adjusted gross income, needs to be below $150,000. If you're above that, you don't lose all of the deduction, but it starts getting phased out. You lose all of it at $275,000. For joint filers, it starts phasing out at $300,000. And again, you don't lose it all immediately. It starts phasing out. And as I mentioned, this is a temporary deduction. It's available for your 2025 tax return, but also 26, 27, and 28. So that's the basics, okay? Some of it maybe you're already familiar with, but it created a lot of questions. And the first question was really the point of that first video, and that is, what happens if my overtime is not listed out separately on my W-2? I know this is a shocker. Starting in 2026, so starting a year from now when you're doing your taxes, it is required that the overtime premium, the eligible overtime premium, will be listed separately on your W-2 and box 12 with some new codes. However, 2025 is a transition year, which means employers, if you're able, put it on the W-2, but you don't have to. It's not required. And this is early in tax season. We've dealt with this a handful of times. We're seeing a few employers that, and these are normally like the largest, really large employers, may have it on there, okay? But most of them we're seeing, it's not listed. It's not listed. And even some sort of in between where they've put it might be, the overtime might have been this, which is not helpful at all, by the way. So we're seeing a few folks it's listed on your W-2, but most folks it's not. And that's the frustrating part. There's action you need to take. So I shared with you in the last video, but I'm going to go in more detail here, that yes, if you worked overtime in 2025, you need to open up your W-2 and take a look at it. You need to open it up and look and see if the overtime is listed on your W-2 and see if that seems accurate, okay? And if it's not listed, or if you just want to be extra sure, go and download, or find, or whatever, your last pay stub from 2025, your last pay stub from 2025. This should list out your overtime that you received for the entire year to date. There should be a year to date section on your pay stub, and that should be listed out on that last pay stub. I've had a few questions from some of you that say, my year to date information is not on my last pay stub, then what do I do? I think in that instance, you need to reach out to your employer. You need to reach out to, if you've got internal payroll service at your employer, or if they have someone external doing that, I think you need to reach out and say, what was my overtime that I received all of last year, okay? You're going to need to get that information. So essentially, If it's listed on your W-2, great, you need to verify it. For most of you, it will not be listed on your W-2. You need to go and grab your last pay stub so that you've got your year-to-date, the full year of 2025 overtime amount, and you need to include that with your W-2 when you're preparing your taxes, giving it to your CPA or your CFP so they can do the calculation, or you need to have that handy when you're doing your own taxes. That's the first one. What do I do? The most common question, what do I do if my overtime is not listed on my W-2? Sadly, that's going to be the majority. Those are the couple steps you need to take. And then a logical follow-up, the second most common question to that is, how do I calculate that overtime premium? I think we all thought on the campaign trail and what was being talked about when the no tax and overtime was, well, it was going to be no tax and overtime. Sadly, that's not the case. It's just no tax on the eligible overtime premium. So again, time and a half, the deduction is only on the half. So if you're working time and a half, if you go and you grab your last pay stub and all of your overtime was time and a half, the good news is you take that overtime amount, which is time and a half, and divide it by 3. Okay, divide it by 3. That gives you your overtime premium, and that's what you would use. That's what your CPA or CFP would use to get the deduction on the new Schedule 1A. Okay, so that's what you would do. So, for example, if you make $20 an hour, time and a half is $30 an hour, and therefore the deductible amount is $10. It's that overtime premium. So the 30 divided by 3, $10. That's how you would calculate that. And I think that one is frustrating to know, but that one's a little self-explanatory. The really frustrating one is, well, what about the double time that I worked on holiday pay or whatever? What about the double time? Okay, logically, you would say, well, it's the overtime premium, so you just take that double time pay amount and divide it in half because the extra pay that I got was the half. I wish it was that simple. And there's contradictory information out there. What we're seeing from our sources is that that's not correct. The actual eligible overtime premium maxes at the half. Okay, it maxes at the half of the time and a half. So even if you're working double time, you actually have to take that double time pay amount and divide it by 4. That's right. So the only amount, even on double time, the only amount that's deductible is just the time and a half, the half portion, even if you're working double time. And I know, wildly frustrating, not even logical. That's how the law works. Another common question I got, and this one is sadly frustrating as well. I heard, this is one of the questions, I heard that in order to have eligible overtime, you need to work over 40 hours a week. That's not fair. In my state or whatever, they count overtime based on the day, not your work week. So if I'm supposed to work 8 hours a day and I work 10, but my overall throughout the week, I only work 36 hours, does that mean I don't get to claim any of the overtime deduction? Sadly, yes. It's based, each state and even some companies can determine, well, how do we define overtime? Is it per day? Is it per week? Is it per pay period? And the government has limited some of those definitions, but based on the state, they've got different definitions. For this ruling, it's 40 hours a week. So even if your normal hours are 35 hours and you work 38 hours and therefore you receive 3 hours of overtime, in order to be able to deduct any of it, you need to be over 40 hours. And so that is wildly frustrating. And again, this is, at least for 2025, it's on the honor system because it's transition year. You might not have been aware of this detail. You might have a colleague that's not aware of this detail and they just took their overtime and they're deducting it. And well, technically they didn't work over the 40 hours, so they shouldn't have been able to deduct it. Technically, guys, that's how the law is supposed to work. It's only eligible overtime is only overtime paid on over 40 hours that you work in a work week. All right, and then the last common question we're going to hit right here, and I know there's more, but the last one we're going to hit right here, I'll finish with a little bit of good news, and that is, hey, for joint filers, is the overtime deduction limited to $12,500 or is it up to $25,000? This is unique because the way the law is written, I think logically you would think, well, for joint filers, it's double the single amount. So the single amount is $12,500. Joint filers, it's $25,000, and therefore, per person, for joint filers, one person, if they if they worked overtime, can get up to $12,500, the other person up to $12,500. Technically not. This rule, uniquely, it's based on, the deduction amount is based on your filing status, not on who earned the overtime. And this is surprising. There's not a lot of information out there about that. That's what we're seeing, is that in an individual, we've done one return for an individual where this applied, joint filer, the deductible, the eligible portion of one person's overtime equaled just over $16,000, and the other person didn't have any overtime. And so because it was a joint return, the deduction amount was that full $16,000. Okay, it wasn't limited to that $12,500, even though just one person of the joint filers had eligible overtime. That for joint filers is up to $25,000. For those of you single filers, this is not good news. You might say, that's not fair. I don't like that. And there's a lot of this, underneath the hood of this law that is just frustrating to apply. But here's the thing. I want you to get the biggest deduction possible. So even though there are frustrating components, even though there's some action you need to take, even though there's some math involved and some work involved and some nuance, I want you to get the maximum deduction. Hopefully, these FAQs, these answers to frequently asked questions, are helpful to you. Work with your CFP. Hopefully your taxes are integrated with your planning, working with your CFP, doing tax planning to get the maximum benefit from these new deductions. Work with your CFP on that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, you can contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or give us a call, 574-247-5898. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.